You're not going to need any equipment, just a yoga mat is going to make this a little bit more comfortable. And if you have any questions, my name is Chase, you can DM me on Instagram. All right, let's get into it. Okay, before we begin, everything we're doing today will last for 45 seconds and we'll have 15 seconds rest. And the first movement is going to be just a gentle bodyweight squat. But you'll notice I'm coming as deep as I possibly can. So we're doing nice deep bodyweight squats here. If it's difficult for you to do this barefoot with your heels on the ground, then I recommend boosting the heels in some way. I'm just turning around to give you another angle to show you that I'm going below parallel here. So really gripping the ground with my feet, trying to keep those arches active, trying to externally rotate my whole legs by pushing my knees outwards as I come deep into that squat. And I'm trying to focus on keeping my upper body as straight as possible. So a nice straight back here. Okay. And we're going to get into an upper body exercise in a second after we've had our 15 seconds rest. Feels good to be moving. Let's get into it. We're just going to do a basic push-up. Now I'm doing push-ups on my toes, but you can do them on your knees, or what I'd prefer you do for an easier version is to elevate the hands. That simulates the full variation of the push-up a lot better than doing it on your knees. I feel like if you do push-ups on your knees, then you're not really developing the total body strength that you need to be able to develop to this real push-up. So if you need to develop this a little harder, then you can elevate the feet. This is all about just managing leverage and using leverage to become a master of your own body weight. You'll notice that I'm performing these really nice and slow and steady and not rushing through the movements. And that will go for all the movements we're doing today. I'm just testing how much space I've got here for our next move, which is the dead bug. So what we're doing is moving our alternative limbs away from the center of the body. So I'm pushing my left knee out and my right arm out, and vice versa. What's important here is that we keep that lower back flat on the ground. So we want to rotate your pelvis down and underneath. So scoop your pelvis kind of back up towards your head, and that's going to flatten out the lower back nice and flat onto the yoga mat beneath you. So as soon as you feel your lumbar spine, your lower back coming up off the ground, that's an indication that we really need to scoop the hips and tuck the ribs to be able to get that nice flat back on the ground. And there's a couple of other movements in this workout that we're going to be really focusing on that today as well. Our next move is a deep core slash glute med activation exercise. This is the clamshell lift. So begin with your knees and hips stacked, and you probably can't tell from this angle, but my knees are just forward of my body a little bit. I've got a 90-degree angle in both my knees, and then I really press my elbow into the floor, so really pushing that shoulder blade into the ground and lifting up through my hips here, having a couple of seconds up the top where I really squeeze and solidify that movement at the top. So abducting the knee out, so that top knee is really coming up and out, and that's going to activate the glute med, glute minor, glute max, pretty much everything in the glutes, as well as some really integral deep core muscles. These are type 2 muscle fibers, so we're getting around about 10 or 15 reps hopefully in that 45-second period before switching and coming to the other side. So again, stacking the hips, knees and ankles. We'll go for another 45 seconds on the other side. Really drive that bottom knee into the mat, and that's going to help us really activate the outer muscles in the leg as we force our hips forward and up, and really push away with that top arm. Try and reach to the sky with that top arm, keep the elbow locked out, and really push away through both of your shoulders here. So keep the ribs tucked and the core on through this move as well. Okay, now we're going to get into a pretty typical core exercise. This is actually one of my favorite core exercises. This is the very beginner progression, or regression in fact, of the hollow body hold. So here I'm keeping a 90-degree angle in my knees. My feet are just hovering over the ground here. Again, I'm trying to scoop my pelvis, so I'm trying to tuck it back towards my face, and that's really going to flatten out that lower back that I was talking about earlier. At the same time, we want to tuck our ribs and lift the shoulder blades off the ground, and what we should be left with there is just the lower back pressing into the floor. Now, once you've got that position solidified, now it's time to focus on your breathing. So breathe nice and deep and really try and keep those shoulder blades lifted throughout this hold. We're going to go through some of the other more difficult progressions of all of these exercises in the coming 20 or 30 minutes, depending on which variation of this video you're on. We're going through 3 rounds in the full version, but we're getting into our next exercise here, which is a single leg glute lift. So really pushing the heel through the ground there and gripping the ground with that left foot, and just coming down until our butt taps the yoga mat, and then we're really thrusting up through the hips, trying to keep that knee locked out, trying to push the heel to the sky there, holding for a second or so at the top to really solidify that top position, and slowly lowering down. You can see there's not a lot of movement through my torso there. I'm really locking that rib cage down to try and help that core engagement through this movement. Okay, quick rest before we switch to the other side. And if you need more rest between these exercises, no problem, just pause the video and then jump back in when you're ready. I'm going to go onto the right side of the single leg glute lift now, driving up with that hip, trying to get as much glute and hip engagement as possible. And that heel is taking most of the force through the ground, so really drive through that heel, but also try and grip the big toe onto the ground there as well, and if you can, maintain a nice open arch in the foot. I've got a bit lazy. Yeah, I just fixed it. Pulling that toe back towards my eyes now and driving through the heel. What tends to happen as you fatigue through this movement is you'll get a slight bend in the knee, so try and keep that top knee straight if possible. Okay, getting into a little more kind of upper body work now. We're going to go into a down dog pedal. So this has been a rest for a lot of you, but for some of you guys, you'll find that this is a really intense calf stretch. So what we're trying to do here is alternatively drive those heels to the ground. And in a perfect world, I would have my back really flat, but I'm doing my best to flatten out, push my chest towards my knees there. I'm starting to get a little bit more movement. But for many of you, you'll be even tighter than I am in your back, and you will really struggle to get a back flat in this position. But that's okay. The main goal here is to really drive the lengthening of the calves, so pushing down through the heel to get a nice calf and hamstring stretch, and just alternating for 45 seconds. Okay, coming into the final upper body movement of this round, and that is shoulder rotations. So you can see I've got slight bend in my knees, I've got a nice flat back, trying to get my chest parallel to the ground, and I'm rotating clockwise, keeping my thumbs up and really driving the rotation from my shoulder blade. So I'm going to do around 10 circles in that direction before we switch in the other direction. So we're going for reps here rather than time, but just go nice and slow and under control, and really keep focusing on getting those thumbs up. Keep your ribs tucked, so really locking the rib cage down, as we've done in a lot of these movements today. Okay, that is our first round done. So that's just over 10 minutes. And we're going to have a quick rest, maybe a minute or two before we get into the next round. So feel free to grab a drink. What I'm going to do is grab a step, because I'm going to use that for some of the other variations in this next 10-minute block. Now, I was speaking earlier about leverage, and just having a basic step or a chair is the best thing you can do to regress and progress a lot of these exercises rather than using weights. I am going to use a couple of really light plates for the last exercise, the shoulder rotations in this next 10-minute block. So grab a couple of light weights or even some rocks, anything you've got around that you can use to just add a little bit more intensity to those shoulder rotations. Okay, I'm gonna whip my shirt off because it's getting pretty damn hot out here. Just excuse the body fat. You know, you don't see too many personal trainers with body fat, but I try and maintain a bit because I do endurance sports. Body fat is important. So we're going to go into 45 seconds of squat variation. And you can do the original squat variation, or you can choose this overhead squat, or what I've now transitioned to is a prisoner squat. So having the hands overhead in some way is really going to challenge the thoracic spine, and that's going to end up making the squat more difficult. But if you're already struggling with the normal body weight squat, just stick to that variation and really focus on going slow and under control through that movement. Okay, we're going to get into push-ups now. I'm going to do an elevated version of the push-up, so feet elevated. Now, if you wanted to make this easier, then you would elevate your hands. So this is just about utilizing leverage to become masters of our own body weight. Now, no matter what push-up variation you're doing, you should be locking those knees out, really squeezing the glutes, trying to solidify the core section so that we're really turning the push-up into a total body exercise and not just an upper body exercise. But if you need to, really just pick a variation of the push-up that you prefer or that challenges you for 45 seconds. I'd recommend not doing push-ups on your knees though. I'd prefer to see you do push-ups on with elevated hands, just because that transitions much better into doing the full push-up. Quick little rest before we get into our core exercise here, and that is going to be the double dead bug. So you can, of course, go back to the original dead bug variation where we're doing the bilateral version, or contralateral version, I should say. But here we're really opening up the hands and the lower body at the same time, and really trying to maintain that integrity through the lower back. So the lower back should be flat and in contact with the mat the whole time. So in order to do that, we really need to really keep those ribs tucked, and we also need to scoop the pelvis, come into posterior pelvic tilt as much as possible throughout this movement. But if you are feeling like that lumbar spine is coming off the ground, then we need to go into an easier version like I demonstrated in the first round. Okay, from the clamshell lift, we're going to do a little more difficult variation that hits some of the adductors. This is called the Copenhagen Plank, and what we're going to do is really press down through the heel and the toe onto that step, and simultaneously raise the hip, driving through the elbow and the shoulder into the ground or into the mat. So the aim here is to lift that hip up as high as possible, but don't let it be at the expense of the movement. You really want to try and watch your hips and make sure that they're going up and down in a fairly straight line rather than kind of scooping. So you should really have a straight line from your shoulders through your hips, knees and feet when you look down towards the step. Again, if that one is a little difficult, you can just go back to the clamshell lift or maybe even a side plank. And this is certainly not an easy exercise, but it is a reasonably new one to me, and I think it's something that people don't get a lot of the training of the adductors, and that's the muscles on the inside of your thigh that you're probably feeling if you're doing this movement. But again, trying to just lift those hips as high as possible and really keep that knee straight and drive through the heel and the elbow simultaneously. Try and push up through that top arm as well, trying to lift that shoulder blade away towards the sky, and just keep an eye on creating a nice straight body in this movement. Okay, we're going to move into the next movement now, which is going to be a tuck hollow. Now, this is a tuck straddle hollow, so a slightly different variation. This is a little more difficult because we're leveraging a little bit further away from the center of our body with those feet now. So I've got my knees really nice and wide, and placing my hands sort of reaching through above my pelvis there. And at the same time, we want to pull the shoulder blades off the ground, and that's going to help firm the lower back down into the ground here. Remember to maintain really nice, steady breathing through this position, and it's really up to you to make this as intense as possible by really holding on to that integrity that you feel in your midsection there that's keeping your lower back on the ground. Okay, our next exercise is the glute quad combo, and this really is about developing more activation through the full range of the glute. So it's important that with my right leg there, I'm really forcing through my heel and my toe, and I'm coming from that lower position, transitioning smoothly through to this pushing variation where I'm pushing my heel towards the sky, pulling my foot back towards my toe, and really giving the glutes a squeeze at that top position there to really solidify the movement. Switching through to the other side to give you a slightly different view on this movement, which is a little bit complex. Pushing through the left foot now, starting in the lower position. We raise the butt off the ground before we begin this movement, and for that whole 45 seconds my butt won't touch the ground. It's really important that we keep that engaged the whole way. And again, if this is too difficult, we can regress back to the standard single leg glute lift. Really try and keep your shoulders broad here, so try and roll your shoulder blades back and down, and push through your upper back into the floor, and simultaneously push through with that heel. Okay, moving on to our next upper body exercise. This is the open dog. So for some of you guys, this is also going to be a little bit of a rest, but I find it's a really nice stretch because we really open up that whole fascial line between the shoulder and the knee. So pressing the hands into the floor, trying to drive the lower heel to the ground there so we get a nice hamstring and calf stretch, keeping the knee straight. But that top knee is obviously bent, and I'm really throwing my right leg way over my hips towards the camera, and that's going to, like I said, really stretch that whole fascial line on the right hand side of my body. Holding 45 seconds, and then we'll switch to the other side. Definitely starting to work hard enough to sweat in this movement. Okay, So now from the other angle, you can see that I'm really trying to push my chest and head towards my knee. Simultaneously, I'm trying to drop that heel to the ground. I've almost got it to the ground there, so that's the goal that we're working towards initially. But throwing that left hip and the left knee and the left ankle way over the other side of the body to really open up this downward dog variation and get a really nice stretch through the whole side body. Remember to try and push away through your hands and push away actively through the shoulders when you're in this position. Okay, I'm grabbing a couple of really light weights to make this shoulder rotation a little more challenging. But if you found the first variation challenging enough, you can stick with just body weight. So I'm just glancing at the camera there to make sure I've got a nice flat back. And what I've forgotten to do is really push through my thumbs and raise my thumbs to the ceiling. So make sure that you are lifting your thumbs. I've just changed it there, that's good. Thumbs to the sky, and that's really going to drive external rotation of the shoulder, which the shoulders love. And try and keep your back as parallel to the ground as possible. I think I've probably bitten off more than I can chew here with those light weights. So really try and focus on getting the body weight version perfect first. This is a pretty good example of what not to do. But I'm doing 10 rotations both clockwise and then anti-clockwise in this variation. And try and keep those ribs tucked as always in this position. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to check out some of my other follow along workouts, you can see them on YouTube in this link. And if you want to check out my programs for trail runners, hikers, skiers, climbers, you can check out my website right here. I'll see you on the summit.